can we just talk about how mind-blowing intuition is for a minute? So, our intuition, I feel like, is so often downplayed or it's just written off as this woo woo thing, instead of honoring and trusting it as this incredible source of information. So, our intuition is basically information that we receive beyond our five senses. And we may not have some sort of scientific proof for it because it's hard to measure things that aren't connected to our five senses. And even so, I mean, there's something very accurate and profound about this. And I don't know if this is true, but I do think that women have a stronger propensity to read their intuition. However, we don't always trust it. And so we don't always use this to our advantage because we are believing that it's not a valid source of information because if we can't measure it, then how can it possibly be real? But some pretty cool things start to happen when you do start to trust your intuition. So there's a lot to back this up, right? If you read any of Malcolm Gladwell's work, he talks about the fact that we can read information instantaneously. Whatever our first instinct is, there's so much that the brain does to instantaneously get a reading on something. And we can start listening to what are those initial reactions that we have to something and help use that to inform us around how we want to act in a given situation, how we want to develop or not develop a given relationship. So intuition is real and it's powerful. Here's my favorite story. Well, one of my favorite stories. I feel like I have a growing arsenal of these now. But one of my favorite stories about intuition is a story that comes from Lynn Twist. She wrote this beautiful book called The Soul of Money, and she's a philanthropist who works, I think she still works for the Hunger Project, but she at least did for many years previously. And one of the expeditions that she went on was to Senegal, where she met with people that were deep in the desert, and they were struggling because they didn't have enough water. They had been living there for thousands of years, and their water source was drying up, and they needed support. So the Hunger Project went there to meet with them to get a better sense of what the situation was and how they could support. When they were there, they were speaking with the men because it was a traditional tribal community, and in that setting or in that culture, the men were the ones who held authority. And so the men were the ones who were speaking to the people who were there from the Hunger Project there to support them. The women were sitting in a circle surrounding them, observing the meetings. And as this woman, Lynn Twist, who was leading this expedition, was sitting there, she felt the power of the women that were sitting around her. And she had the intuition to say, I want to speak to the women. And there was quite a bit of resistance initially from the men that were there, part of the tribe. And with her trust and insistence, she managed to pull together a meeting with these women. And right away, there were a few women who stepped up into leadership and started to share with her. And they said, we know that there's water here. There is a well deep, deep beneath our land, and it has plenty of water. And she said, how do you know? And they said, we know. We can feel it. We can sense it. We have visions of it. We've had dreams of it. And the conviction that they had, the trust that they had in their intuition, even though they couldn't see it, smell it, touch it, feel it, it was hundreds of feet beneath the earth, was so strong that she said, okay, then why don't we start drilling? And the women said, well, we haven't had permission from the men. We've told them that this is here, and the men have told us that they're not willing to dig. And so the role of the Hunger Project there was then to support the women in helping the men to give them permission to follow through on the intuition that they had. And so in supporting that effort, they were then able to support the women in digging the well. Now, it was the women themselves who actually did the digging. So they, with a few really simple tools, and over the course of a year, these women dug and dug and dug deep, 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 deep into the earth, singing, drumming, taking care of each other's kids, and there was never a doubt that the water was there. Meanwhile, the men stood around and watched skeptically, but the women persevered and they knew what was there because they trusted their intuition. And of course, lo and behold, they dig and they find there's not only a well, a source of water for their village, but there's enough water. There's a massive lake that can support the 17 surrounding villages within the desert. And all of that became accessible to these people because the women trusted their intuition.